Hello, everyone. How are you? Welcome to our Open Talk number 76, Depth, Migration, and Exploitation. So today we're going to talk about some of the most unheard voices from the food systems ecosystem, which are the seasonal workers. These are the people that come from different parts of the world, mostly from the global south, to work in Europe in different countries in agricultural schemes that are needed because of the labor shortages. So with us today, we have Catherine McAndrew. She's part of the Land Workers Alliance. Hello, Catherine. Thank you for being with us
Hi,
today.
hi.
And let's just jump into it because I know it's a very, very complex subject and it's very important for me for people to really understand. And so if you can please just give us first like a little bit about like a little summary of who you are and what your organization does.
Sure. Hi everyone. It's lovely to meet you. My name is Catherine McAndrew. I work for the Land Workers Alliance, which is a union of small farmers, peasants, and land-based workers based in the United Kingdom, which is affiliated to La Via Campesina, which is an international organization of peasants and agricultural workers unions involving about 200 million members in 81 different countries. And so my area of work, I coordinate something called the Migrant Worker Solidarity Campaign. And so this is a campaign that is focused on the conditions for migrant seasonal workers working in agro-industrial farms that supply fruit, specifically to large supermarkets, large food companies, and also as well specifically workers who are recruited via temporary migration schemes. And so by temporary migration scheme, I mean these are visa systems which allow farm workers to come to the UK from their home countries for very, very short periods of time
How
in the
long are we
UK.
talking about? 6 months, two
About 6
months?
months, yeah, 6
Okay.
months. And actually, the UK says 6 months for these workers, specifically because if workers stay longer than 6 months, then they count towards net immigration figures. And so even though there are strange situations now resulting from this, where some farms have to recruit 2 sets of workers each year because their growing seasons are longer than 6 months, and they have to get
Okay.
different people to come in and do that work in order primarily as to satisfy the kind of need to keep publicly immigration figures down. So
Okay. So
these
take us a
temporary
little bit like step by step. How does this visa scheme and immigration and like seasonal workers visa scheme work? How does it start?
Sure, sure. So the seasonal worker scheme, which is so lots of countries have temporary migration schemes like this. So, for instance, naturally, this work in the UK emerges from engaging with other La Via Campesina agricultural workers unions that were already dealing with the problem of temporary migration schemes. So, in Spain, you have a scheme called a contract in origin, which is specifically for workers coming from Morocco to work on soft fruit farms in Huelva. You have the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program in Canada and H2A in the US. But the UK one specifically emerges in 2019 after, in the run up to the UK leaving the European Union. After the UK voted to leave the European Union, we found that fewer workers were coming from the UK's traditional kind of recruitment areas in Eastern Europe, so
Mm.
Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and farms were faced with a very sudden labor shortage. That the UK population is very separated from the land. We don't really have much in the way of a peasantry anymore. Like, the UK is one of the first countries in the world to really start programs of enclosure, of privatization of common land, of forcing peasants from land into the cities, etc. And
Okay.
so that means that we as a population we are very disconnected from agriculture, hence the need for workers coming from specifically from often from rural areas with experience of this kind of work, to come over to undertake it. But anyway, these workers were not coming from Eastern Europe anymore, and so the UK needed some kind of response to this. So initially, this was the seasonal worker pilot, which was a very small about 2,000 workers or so in 2019,
Okay.
and there like a couple of and two recruitment agencies were given the contract to recruit these workers, and they came from Ukraine. And this pilot actually showed immediately that there were some problems in the sense that what this scheme intended to do, what this pilot did, was workers could only work on farms as placed by their recruitment agency, by their scheme operator. And so that means that workers could not freely change jobs. And so if
Okay.
they were being treated very badly, if they were not, if they weren't being treated very well, they had no right to leave that for another job. Also, as well, the workers also had to pay quite high costs to come to the UK. So they had to pay for their flights, their visa application, and biomedical checks before they came to the UK as well. So that means they arrived with debt. So
And
that
this
means
and this like this intermediate actor, like this agency, was this agency is like, are these agencies typically also part of like UK or UK based, or are they like based in the different home countries?
they are UK based. It varies between different, like for instance, so uh, Concordia, for instance, as one of these agencies,
Right.
has traditionally got lots of offices in Eastern Europe where it recruits things. Some scheme operators, they have offices in the countries that they recruit from, but others have very limited. Because this is the other thing is we'll get onto this, is that there's no limits to where these companies can recruit from. They can recruit from any country whatsoever.
Yeah.
So what we often see is, especially after the Ukraine war, I'll cover all of this because there's a long history here. What often happens is you have these agencies will set up in a country, immediately run into problems, and then immediately pull out of that country. So sort of like picking up a country and then dropping it and then going from one to the other,
Okay.
leaving a bit of a trail of
Mess.
a mess in the background in the wake. But anyway, so so again, this pilot revealed from the start that there were some issues with this model. That essentially the way that this scheme that this pilot was operating was essentially tying these workers to employers, which meant that they had very little means of redress in the face of exploitation, and this
Mm.
resulted in what was seen in this pilot was like workers were not getting the full amount that they picked. They weren't getting. They were being not paid for all the hours that they worked. They have work was withdrawn from them as punishment, and they had very little way of holding these employers to account.
Okay.
However, despite that being seen in 2019, there was a very strong pressure from the agricultural lobby in the UK, the National
Mm.
Farmers Union, to expand this scheme as quickly as possible. The farms were desperate for workers, and they wanted them on any terms possible.
Okay.
And
Wow.
so
Okay,
we
so the
saw
pilot clearly failed, but it was still implemented, and
it was
it's
still
today.
implemented.
It's running today.
Exactly. So you had a very rapid expansion from about 2,500 workers in 2019 to 30,000 workers in 2021. So now today we have about 45,000 workers. So this is now the major. There's about the UK's horticultural, because it's the horticultural system that employs these workers. This is where it's the very labor intensive elements of farming, and that sector in the UK is very anemic compared to in Huelva and Almeria. You've got hundreds of thousands of workers. Like the UK has about 60,000 agricultural workers in general, and now the majority of them are sourced from this seasonal worker scheme, and therefore exposed to this issue.
So right
Yeah,
now just to see if I got it right, 60. The horticultural labor force is around 60,000 people in the
yeah, yeah,
UK,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and of those, around 45,000 they come from these seasonal workers scheme.
Yes, that's correct.
Wow. Okay.
This is now the main way of recruiting farm workers now.
Okay.
So yeah, but yeah, so Where should we go from here? Where should we go from here?
I would like for us to understand like the step by step of a person that lives. For example, I know
Mm,
we have a common friend here who is Julia. Julia
yeah.
is a Bolivian girl who you introduced me to, and
Mm-hmm.
she has been one of the people that have like undergone the entire process. So I would
Mm-hmm.
like for our people that are with us here to understand like what is the how does the process begin when they are in their home country. How do they sell the how do they pitch the idea, because
Sure.
it clearly failed. How do they pitch it to make it sound attractive, and what
Sure.
happens as
Sure.
soon as they come home, like come into the UK? Are they able to come with their families? Like what are like the details of these people that have to live through this experience?
Sure. So, I'll tell you a bit of a story that. So, I'll tell you a story about what happened in 2022.
Yeah,
So, typically, workers before 2022 on the scheme came from Ukraine.
yeah, okay,
So there was essentially a pivot from sourcing workers from Eastern European countries in the European Union to Ukraine.
okay.
And then, of course, you have the outbreak of the
The
war,
war. Hmm.
and also as well, the government didn't tell farms or scheme operators, the recruitment agencies, that this scheme was going to continue until very late, until only about 3 months before the season started. So essentially, you had, because of the war, uh, the uh, the the recruitment agencies had to completely change the recruitment within 12 weeks. They had to
Okay,
completely repivot. And so, what these recruitment agencies ended up settling on was Nepal and Indonesia
okay,
as countries. And we worked very closely with Nepalese workers over this period, and we produced a report called Debt Migration and Exploitation, and which included testimonies from these workers saying how they were recruited. And the way they described it is essentially what was happening was, one of these workers was approached by a cousin, by a relative, saying, "I know a way to get to the UK. I If you give me £2,000 and your passport, I will arrange everything for you." And of course, once this we called them third party brokers. Once these kind of intermediaries had their passport, they can then say, another issue has come up. I need more money. Another issue has come up. I need another £1,000. And so eventually, that this worker this was typical of Nepalese and Indonesian workers, found that they had paid about sort of £4,000 to £5,000 of debt, of money to this broker. And they were having to borrow money from family, they were having to sell possessions in order to meet these costs. And then when it came to boarding the flight, the broker then said, "Here's the email address that you will talk to your employer with." And then the worker was able to see, I have been completely scammed here. What this broker has been doing has been pretending to be me and has been signing up to the scheme on my behalf.
okay, wow.
And then the thing that happened with these Nepalese and Indonesian workers is that when they when they came to the UK, what they found was they weren't guaranteed work for the full 6 months of the visa. Sometimes they would be placed on a farm at the end of the season where there wasn't enough fruit for them to be picked, that they would have to leave and go home earlier.
Yeah.
Would work on a farm where, if they were not picking fast enough, because this is the other thing, as I mentioned earlier, that typically it's people. The UK is a very urbanized population, and it's rural workers that are coming to do this work. This has changed very much, in the sense that the only people who are able to afford the cost of flights, visas, and all these third-party fees
Hmm.
are workers who come from middle-class backgrounds. So there's a big issue. I was talking to a Kazakh student recently, and she was telling me about how there's a big issue in Kazakhstan of doctors and teachers and office workers signing up for this scheme because they're the ones who can pay the cost of
Of
the
course,
flights and the visa,
they
even
can
though
pay, but they don't have the experience in
but
working
they
in a
don't have
farm.
the experience and and they're not necessarily able to deal with that kind of workload. So so these people may come here and find find they're not able to do the work, and again then they're left with this huge debt. Then they're left with this huge debt that they have no way to pay off in their country, because the way that this whole um, migrant labor system works, and also I'd also say the way the outsourcing system works, where companies in rich countries like the UK, instead of manufacturing things here, will manufacture things in China and Bangladesh, etc. It's currency differentials. Like
Of
the
course.
value of the minimum wage in Nepal is £7,000 a year.
Hmm.
And what's being promised with this scheme is that you could earn that in 6 months,
6 months, of course.
and you could earn even more than that. And so it's like, the way I've always phrased it, it's like you're being asked to get into £100,000 of debt in order to potentially earn £200,000 or something like that.
Okay.
It's like it's a big upfront cost which workers will sell. I know an Indonesian worker who sold, they were a fruit seller whose income was £100 a month before coming to the UK.
Hmm.
And they sold their family's vehicles, they sold their family's property in order to be able to pay for the flights and third-party fees in order to take part in this scheme.
Okay. So
And then when
it affects the entire family, even.
it affects the entire family, and then when and in this particular worker, they arrived in the UK, and they were given 6 weeks of work before being dismissed. And so they had to return home, and they have
Or
no way
nothing.
of recouping those losses now. They have no way of recouping those losses, and
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 they
again,
couldn't ask for, like, okay, say transfer me to another farm that maybe does need work.
well, their case was complicated. Their case was a bit complicated in the sense that I realize I'm jumping between multiple cases in this instance, but
No
in
worries.
this instance, what had happened is um, a UK recruitment agency has partnered with an Indonesian recruitment agency. This was happening in 2024, in order to try and after the big scandal of all of these workers that came to the UK in 2022 and been overcharged. There wasn't any recruitment from Indonesia in 2023, and then with the support of the Indonesian embassy, they wanted to try again. They wanted to try again and to send workers over and hopefully not have them be overcharged.
Okay.
However, the Indonesian company that the UK firm went into partnership with was involved similar personnel to the company that had overcharged workers to come to the UK the previous time.
Okay.
It was Al Zabara was the one in 2022, and they had rebranded themselves to be a company called PT Mardel. There was also set up with the support of the Indonesian embassy something called a communication forum, was named for Forcom, and this was meant to be a forum of former seasonal workers who were there to support workers in the UK, but also most crucially, make sure that they left the UK at the end of it, because of course, because so many workers were overcharged, so many workers,
Try to stay.
hadn't made enough money. A lot of them overstayed their visa, and that's again the
Mhm.
priority of the UK government, is making sure people leave at the end of their contracts.
Okay.
But anyway, the thing is, Forcom very rapidly became a corruption racket, with members saying, like, if you pay into our cooperative,
Mhm.
we will make sure that you get to the UK quicker. So anyway, when these workers were dismissed, PT Mardell put a lot of pressure on them to leave immediately rather than get redeployed to another farm, as was what was meant to be done.
Mhm.
And also in the process, one of the workers went to the press and said, "This is what's happened to me. I've been overcharged. This is a big issue."
Mhm.
Um, Initially, actually, some of the workers who refused to return home, so 5 workers were dismissed, the workers who refused to return home were redeployed, and they made very good money, and they made very decent money on another farm. And I think the reason that they got dismissed was because they weren't picking fast enough. And the reason they weren't picking fast enough is because it's this farm, it's the same farm that Julia worked on,
Mhm.
Haygrove Farm.
Mhm.
And this is what Julia alleges, is that there is discrimination by supervisors on the farm, where supervisors will give the best fields to workers of the same nationality as them,
Okay.
and they will give the worst jobs, the worst fields, and also unpaid work to workers of nationalities who are different from them.
Okay. So the
Uh,
payment is so the payment so there's like an hourly payment, but there are also rewards
mm.
or like if you I don't know if you pick more or if you are able to collect more or harvest more.
So the way it works is, it's so we have something. It's a piece rate system. You're
Okay.
meant to be paid at least the minimum wage per hour that you work,
Hmm.
but there is a piece rate system where if you pick more than the value of the minimum wage,
Hmm.
and so in this, in so in often it's about sort of like if you pick more than 20 kilos of fruit an hour,
Okay.
then you will get a bonus. However, the way that it's often calculated is it means that you're only farms often only pay you when you are actually doing picking work. When you
Okay.
are actually doing the picking work, so there's often like like times of like setting up, times of like clearing up at the end of the day, travel
Lunch.
times between sites, lunch and toilet breaks. Those are not paid. Those are often workers often go unpaid.
Okay.
And again, when we talk about as well issues in other countries, before we did all of this work in the UK, we work very very closely with SOCSAT, a union in Andalusia,
Okay.
who support migrant workers. And this is again like often the thing that they spend a lot of their time doing is trying to get the Almeria and Huelva collective agreements enforced. So these
Okay.
are the state mandated, the unions negotiate on one side, the employers negotiate on another, and they come up with like, okay, you should
Yeah.
be paid for at least a 20-minute sandwich break. You should be paid for the time it takes to travel between sites. This is something that also like that unions in southern Spain
But
often
these are
see
like
as well.
minimum like legal labor rights, no?
Exactly. These are minimum legal labor rights. But of course, we're dealing with in both instances, we're dealing with enterprises that are very far away from the public eye, and we're also dealing with enterprises that are staffed by people who are, are seen as having very few legal rights under the system, and that is by design. That is by design, and so yeah, I can tell you.
Let's talk about a little bit about how they live because you have mentioned like the conditions of the farm. You have mentioned how they have like these like all these different like details related to what type of a moment do they get paid or not. And what about the living conditions? Do they live in the farm? Do
Mhm.
they and because obviously they still have to pay where they live, I assume.
Yes. So so in this instance, what happens? Mostly farms are they're essentially they essentially farm workers live on caravans on the farm site, and
Wow.
so what typically happens is an old the farm will purchase an old caravan from a holiday campsite to be repurposed as accommodation for farm workers,
Okay.
and you will typically have about 4 to 6 farm workers who who won't know each other before they get placed there. Often there are issues with like workers of different genders being placed there, and sort of frictions that result from that. Being placed in these caravans, and typically a worker will pay about £69 a week to live in one of these caravans.
Okay.
And so and again, the standards of these caravans, I say that these are old holiday caravans. The standards of them are often pretty poor. And actually, the issue of living conditions, of housing conditions, is it's the number one issue for a lot of workers. This is what workers are saying is absolutely the priority that needs to be fixed, because as well, and as well, like legally speaking, that £69, the rate is set by the agricultural ministry. It's meant to be all inclusive. It's meant to be include
Of
utilities
course,
and gas, electricity. But often farms will charge workers extra
additions. Okay.
to pay for these. So like they'll charge them like £40 for a gas bottle, and that gas bottle is meant to last them for the whole month, but it only lasts them 12 days or something like that.
Okay. What about
And
the
in addition,
food?
in the food, workers have to provide their own food. Often the farms will give them they'll give them transportation
To
to
the
go
farm?
to a local city or something like that,
Mm. Okay.
to pick up food from a local supermarket or something like that. But again, it's food that these are workers who are coming from very different places and all that kind of stuff, and it's very often very difficult for them to get the food that they're seeking from these British supermarkets. And again, these are also another expense. This is again, it's another £50 a week for shopping or something like that.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
it's like you can see how all of these kind of things add up, as in like where workers are promised, oh, you'll be earning £500 a week, you'll be working 42 to 48 hours a week, and you'll be there's possibilities for these piece rate bonuses and all this kind of stuff. But then they'll come to the UK, and they find they won't be offered as much work as they expected. They've had to pay for their flights, their
Flights.
visas, their medical checks. So they're coming, assuming that the law is being followed, and there's been no third parties involved. They'll be coming over with at least £1,500 of debts.
Mhm.
And then you've also got the deductions of you have to pay for your caravan, you have to pay for your food, you have to pay for utilities, etc. And
Mhm.
you can see how all of this ends up chipping away at this this promised transformatory kind of, because again, this is the thing, if workers get these wages, if workers get the payments that they're expecting, this can be transformatory. These
Mhm.
remittances are essential in development terms. They can be a really important thing
Yeah.
for making sure that workers in communities in the global south get access to hard currencies necessary to inc- massively improve their standards of living.
Yeah.
But at the moment, there are lots of caveats, lots of
It's not
hidden
happening,
costs
of course.
that are undermining this.
Okay, so of
Um,
those £500, what is like the average of what they really end up
the
receiving
average
or,
of
or
what they
making?
really get. I mean, I say 500. I said £500 there because this is what Julia and her colleagues were
Yeah,
promised. So
£500 a week.
they were promised £500 a week, and
Mhm.
that is I don't I think what they actually earned was closer to about £200 a week or
Wow,
something
so
like
less
that.
than half.
And it's like, I think and then so what happened with Julia and her colleagues. So just to give an introduction for the audience, so in 2023, a farm called Haygrove recruited workers from Chile. So Haygrove is a multinational fruit producing company in the UK.
We're talking about
That
strawberries, like berries.
cherries are what cherries, apples, strawberries. But one of the things that they're most notable for actually is they are the ones who introduced the kind of the large polytunnel model to the UK in the 1990s. So
Okay.
they saw the developments that were happening in southern Spain and Almeria, the sort of sea plastic, the sort of like the big development
The
of
greenhouses
the
with
greenhouses there, and then they started to produce the same kind of polytunnels in the UK.
mhm.
So that's what they're most famous for. But anyway, they've got affiliates all over the world. They've got affiliates in South Africa, and farms in China, and they've also got farms in Chile. So via their affiliates in Chile, they decided they were going to recruit workers directly with the support of one of these scheme operators.
Mhm.
And what they did was they offered. So this is about 130 workers, and they offered them loans to pay for their flights to come to the UK. So saying like so we'll pay for your flights, but then you'll repay us when you
When they
start
work.
working, and you'll earn this much money in the UK, and it'll all be wonderful and sunny. But anyway, what happened was when they arrived in the UK, they were kept in a campsite for 12 days without any pay, and because the fruits that they were come to pick was not ready. And actually, this is quite a poor move from Haygrove, because actually what had happened was the law had changed in the UK, which said that instead of workers being on what we call 0 hour contracts, which are like, you don't get any guaranteed hours. Your farm can offer you as much work or as little work as they like, and that meant that. And the big scandal that resulted from that was farms were saying, well, if you're not picking, because I mentioned those targets,
Yeah.
what often happens is like, instead of it being like, oh, if you pick over 20 kilos of fruit, you get a bonus.
Mhm.
What often happens is if you're not picking 20 kilos of fruit an hour, you're going
You
to get
get deducted.
punished. Well, you're not picking fast enough. You're not making the value of your pay. We are going to send you back to your caravan, and then you will lose opportunities for earning. So there was something introduced called the 32-hour rule, which is like, okay, workers are now on 32-hour contracts, so they have to be paid for at least 32 hours a week.
Okay.
And so Haygrove waiting, keeping these workers in this campsite, having not signed their contract, and having no way of getting alternative employment, or have no way of getting alternative earnings, that goes against the spirit of this new law very much.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then when the fruit was ready, work started, and then they found that they weren't being offered 42 to 48 hours a week. They were being offered much less, many less hours. They were being given the worst fields
Okay.
compared to people of the same nationality as their supervisors, who were being given the best fields.
Okay.
They were being expected to do all the cleaning up at the end of the day and not getting paid at all for that, because, of course, as I said earlier, they're not getting paid for activities that are not related to picking.
Yeah.
And then, to add insult to injury, they were asked to repay the cost of their flights at a much inflated rates. They're at about £400 more expensive than they
Than
were
what it was.
expecting,
Okay.
and they were expected to pay £250 a week towards these costs. And this was leaving, as I said, like, workers were
Yeah.
earning
No.
about £200 to £300 under this, and this was leaving them with absolutely nothing. And
Right.
so what this prompted was a strike of the Latin American workers. So about of the 130 that came, 88 walked off the job. They had a big meeting in the center of the farm, and the way that the farm responded was essentially to say, okay, well, if some of you are having such a terrible time, then we'll arrange for you to go back to Chile. We'll arrange for you to go back home. And what also happened as well is that some of the kind of like the sort of leaders of the strike suddenly found that they weren't being offered any work, and some of them were finding that they were getting dismissal letters.
Okay.
And so
Fired.
they were thinking, okay, well, there's no work here for us anymore. We are being sacked. We're being, we're being retaliated against. Okay, we'll go to London and wait for our flights to be booked. It's unclear whether the farm told them to go to London or whether they went on their own initiative here.
Okay.
I've heard both from from different people. Anyway, but when they went to London to wait for their flights, they were told that, okay, well, you've absconded now. You've left the farm. You're no longer our responsibility. You are now you're
On your
nothing
own.
to do with us. You're on your own. And so this group of 30 workers, they spent several weeks homeless. The Chilean members of the group, they got repatriated by their embassies,
Okay.
but the 13 Peruvian, Haitian, and Bolivian workers did not. And now those workers are living in they're essentially living in Salvation Army. Salvation Army is a big UK charity. They're living in safe houses provided by them. Which are, I mean, the Salvation Army is it's a very old charity that was set up, a very Christian charity,
Mm-hmm.
which was set up essentially to provide a bit of a kind of like, we will discipline the poor out of their poverty is a large part of their philosophy,
Okay.
and they very much carry on that in their and how they treat these workers in their safe houses, where where there'll be cases of workers being separated from one another, or
Mm.
being moved to a different safe house punitively,
Okay.
and so very much. This is very much the phrase the workers have used is re-traumatizing,
Of
is
course.
kind of like the fact that they have to kind of justify the
Why are they
reason
there? Yeah.
why they're there, the
Mm.
fact that the Salvation Army doesn't offer them any actual support for their issues, the fact that they treat them very poorly. It's another layer of, and again, so in this case, it's the way that they have been treated by UK authorities is another layer of issue, because again, these
Yeah.
workers, yeah, go on, go on.
I wanted to precisely talk about that because there's clearly being a systematic violation of labor rights, of human rights. No, I think it's pretty clear. But
Yes.
what happens when these people go to the authorities? Because if it was a UK citizen that went to the authorities and said, "This is how my employer is treating me," there
Mm,
will clearly be some consequences for the employer. So what happens when these people go to the authorities also, and also to understand this concept that is being included in this discourse, which is this modern slavery, no?
mm,
What is this modern slavery department, and how does it end up working or not working within this scope of people that, because they are migrants, they are clearly not being treated as citizens or given any legal rights to even
mm.
being heard.
So I think there's a couple of elements here. One is the so I'll say what they did was one. So so essentially the way that these workers were recruited was strange.
Mhm.
Their employer offered them loans to come to the UK, and then expected them to repay these loans at a much higher cost.
Mhm.
This is something that's because I said there's the issue with workers taking on debt, etc. But again, these debt, it's different when the debt is directly with the employer,
Yeah.
and that's something that marks this case out from other
Okay.
issues, and makes it essentially this is where the grounds for modern slavery come from, in the sense that
Okay.
these were that the employer actually had this debt over them, that they were able to extract extra money and leave them, essentially absorb all of their wages via the
Payment of
repayments for
this.
this.
Mhm.
And so essentially what a couple of things happened was these workers went to the UK police, the Herefordshire police, who are nearby them, and I said about this. This is what was happening to them, and there was no real action was taken. They also came into contact with an organization called Libera, which is an anti-slavery organization in Chile, which has been doing phenomenal work supporting these workers over these since 2023.
Okay.
And
Libera.org, no? It's
sorry.
libera.org.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. They're really, Carolina Rudnick at Libera has been absolutely fantastic, and really tireless in supporting these workers. But anyway, so these workers also made a complaint to the Gangmaster and Labor Abuse Authority,
Okay.
which is essentially an organization. So it was set up in 2004 in response to so there was a disaster in somewhere called Morecambe Bay, where Chinese cockle pickers, so these are they harvesting shellfish.
Okay.
They had been recruited in a very kind of very debt bonded way. Their employer, their gangmaster, had a lot of authority over them. The UK authorities had no idea they were there. Anyway, they ended up drowning, about 80 of them drowning, and then in response to this, the Gangmaster and Labour Abuse Authority was set up in order to say, we are going to look at recruitment issues. We are going to
Okay.
license and regulate the recruitment sector in order to
Yeah.
prevent this from happening again. Anyway, I believe that the GLLA had I think, one interview with these workers, and they said, "Thank you for your interview. We'll sort it all out," and then never really contacted them again. And something that Carolina has been doing is essentially doing the work that GLLA should have been doing, taking statements from workers, gathering evidence, and trying to just and delivering it to them, almost to say, like, look, I have done your job for you. This is obviously a case of modern slavery.
Of
You
modern
have to
slavery.
act in this instance. But yeah, the in terms of like as well, in terms of like redress as well, and also as additionally as well, these workers also came into contact with a trade union called United Voices of the World. So you know, UVW are a leading union of specifically Latin American migrant workers. Often representing workers in the social care sector, the cleaning sector,
Okay.
security guards, and and so they have been supporting these workers in an employment tribunal. So this is where essentially that this is where a way of employees to take their employer to
Like
court.
judicial action.
Judicial action, yes.
Mm.
And so and again, so this whole issue, this whole case happened in I think July 2023, and only now in February 2025 are we beginning to have initial hearings of this employment tribunal.
Wow.
And we were actually um yeah, they're due to have them in January, but the interpreter that the court had booked, for Spanish English interpretation, was too incompetent to do their job, and so the hearing had to be suspended, and it's now going to happen, again in February. So
Okay.
yeah, and I do want to say actually, like, in terms of like, is there justice for British workers? I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. It's again the amount of time that it takes a case to be heard in these employment tribunals.
Okay.
It's the same for UK workers that again that they have to wait a very 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 long time for
Okay.
these hearings to be held. A big issue is that workers, because another farm worker, a Nepalese farm worker, took her employer to court via this tribunal, and they were unsuccessful because and this is a big worry for me as well in this case, because oral evidence, so evidence that the
Like the
worker has
testimony. Mhm.
testimony is not counted. So often, if farms are able to present their books and say, "Look, everything is in order," and then the farm worker is able to say, "Actually, no, that's not how I remember it."
So
Often,
the
it's just
verbal
that
testimony of workers is not
the
being
verbal
taken into
testimony
account.
of workers will not be taken seriously. It would not be counted as evidence. So the court
Wow.
system is rigged in favor of employers, very very
Okay.
much so. And I find it incredible that because again, I work with with SOX at the Spanish Trade Union, that we have been able to get justice for workers in Spain and justice for workers in Morocco
Okay.
far quicker and far more effectively than we have been for workers in the UK.
Okay.
But the additional element, because you mentioned about the migration situation, the additional big problem here is that the problem is that these workers have not been able to work for this whole time.
Of course.
If you are suspected as a victim of modern slavery, you get a stipend of about £60 a week or something like that. A very, very, very
Okay.
small amount of money, which isn't enough to meet the workers' basic needs. It isn't enough, and also as well, workers are not allowed. They're not allowed access to the public funds. There's something called no recourse to public funds. So the benefit system they don't have access to. The healthcare system is extremely hard for them to access as well.
Okay.
And so, so this is again the fact that these workers have essentially had to put their lives on hold for for almost 2 years now.
Mm.
Like something Julia is to introduce Julia Cacano. She is a worker from Bolivia. Her family, there are Bolivian peasants, and so she comes from from Bolivian peasant kind of like background, and her family as well also has she's got quite a traditional political struggle, and I'm not kind of she's very much been leading this group in taking a kind of more more direct political action
Yeah.
on this, like finding that actually the system is completely not set up for us.
Yeah.
It's
Even if
completely.
even when you are already kind of like declared as a victim of modern slavery, you really can't do much because of the way it is structured. I mean,
Yeah,
you can't go out and find work on your own. You can't.
my see, I need to work out exactly what this is. So this is a limit of my knowledge. Actually, it's kind of like because my understanding is because what these workers want is residency. They
Of
want
course.
the ability to be able to, because this is what they came to the UK to do. They came here to work.
Yeah.
They came here in order to be able to earn the hard currency that would be able to sort of like help
Yeah.
their families back home,
Yeah.
and they want to be able to do that. So my understanding is that the if they're declared victims of modern slavery, they would be able
Mhm.
to get a temporary residency status that would
Oh,
allow
okay.
them to just to. But then again, I don't want to. I don't know enough
No
about the
worries.
system
No
to
worries.
comment on that,
Okay.
because this is again, this is the other thing is like you have to. What's really been stark for me is how very much in terms of like the worker support side
Mhm.
is that it's a very small amount of resources and expertise, and there are a lot dedicated organizations in this field. Like we work together in something called the seasonal worker interest group with a group of organizations who have a special interest in in conditions for migrant farm
Can you repeat the
workers.
name of the group so everybody
Seasonal
can?
worker interest group.
Okay.
But again, it's we're talking about it's a small number of individuals who are
Yeah.
all very overworked, all trying to navigate a system which is very complex,
Hmm.
and it's meanwhile the other side have you know you've got the government who is trying their best to ensure to pander to anti-migrant sentiments, because of course, because the result of all of this, as they say, like the way I like to think about temporary migration schemes is that they're the perfect intersection of the kind of interests of the far right and of
Of
the
course.
bosses, in the sense like the bosses want workers that they have no obligation to, that they have no rights to redress, to healthcare that they have to pay for, that or any other social benefit that comes out
Mm.
the boss's pocket, and that they can get rid of
Easily.
instantaneously, and
Mhm.
just set send them to the far corners of the world. And meanwhile, you have them have the sort of racist, the far right kind of tendencies where say they want as few migrants as possible, and if they do have to have any migrants, they want them to have no rights to anything whatsoever. And so you can see how this comes together in
Of
the
course.
temporary migration scheme, where it's
Hmm.
like the workers, the migrants, when they come here, they can only work for one employer. That employer
Can do
has
whatever.
lots of visa like power over them. These workers have no rights to any social benefits or anything like that. So
Mm.
yeah, I
Yeah.
and we're again the thing that we are seeing in the UK. It is not just limited to the seasonal worker sector, but the care sector as well is increased. Actually, you often hear even worse horror stories in the care sector
Okay.
in the UK, because in that instance, like in this instance, it's a recruit. In the agricultural sector, it's the six scheme operators, the six recruitment agencies with the visa sponsors. So at least there's a little bit of separation
Okay.
from the farm, from the employer and the worker. But in the care sector, it's the employer who are the direct visa sponsor. It's the employer that is often
Mm.
like
Okay. Okay.
getting workers to pay all of this money to come directly to the employer.
Hmm.
And so there's even like the modern slavery potential is even higher,
Yeah.
I feel, in the care sector. But yeah.
Okay, so this is all very, very worrying, and also taking into account that we know that this is happening not only in the UK but also in Spain and other European countries. So my
Yeah.
last question before we close: do something. Is there a way, for example, for us of knowing that if I go to Sainsbury's or to Waitrose or to Tesco, is there a way of knowing that the strawberries or the apples or the cherries that I am buying come from a particular farm that has this? That doesn't respect any labor rights? Like, is there a way of exposing the situation through what we get, which is the information of the supermarket?
It's often quite entertaining for me at the moment because often because again, like, I've not really talked about my experience like supporting workers in Morocco, or like, and I've only touched a little bit in southern Spain, but increasingly when I go to my local Sainsbury's, because it'll have like, this is a product of Surexport or Sudoberry or Azura on there, and I was like, oh, okay, this I'm finding fruit from a farm that there has been a dispute that I've been involved with,
Mhm.
and it's always quite a kind of quite an eye-opening one thing. I think so. The thing I think is key. I think is like is for consumers to form is to join up as an organization to demand better conditions for their workers, and to join and as an organization to make a partnership with organized farm workers. And my big inspiration for this is the Coalition of Immokalee Workers in Florida.
Okay.
So this is an organization of Latin American and Haitian migrants in the city of in the town of Immokalee in Florida,
Okay.
who are tomato pickers. And in the 1990s, they formed an organization to demand better pay and better conditions for farm workers. Um, they found, however, that there was a limit to how much they could do at the farm level, because the farms, they weren't the ones making all of the money
Okay.
from this. It was the fast food companies, and it was the supermarkets, and it was the buyers who were making the money from this, and most importantly, driving the prices of fruit down. Because this is the other thing. Like, this is what's happening on farms is often for workers is a symptom of the fact that the margins, that
Mhm.
the pressure on these businesses, essentially what's happening is that farms are competing with one another to provide these Tesco, Sainsbury's, McDonald's, whoever, these big buyers with the cheapest produce possible, and then competing
Of
not
course.
just nationally for this, but also internationally with
Internationally, of course.
with like Morocco, the workers are paid €7. They have a separate minimum wage for agricultural workers, which is €7 a day. Um, so the CIW was finding, okay, there's limitations to our protests and strikes at the farm level. We need to find some way of impacting the consumers. We need to find some way of impacting the
Exactly.
buyers. And so they teamed up primarily with student organizations and faith groups. There was one organization called the Student Farm Worker Alliance, which was particularly influential. And the first company they went for was Taco Bell, and they demanded that Taco Bell essentially pay. They worked out if all the buyers paid 1 to 4 cents extra for the tomatoes, there would be enough for them to raise the pay to a living level.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
this was calculated about, again, this is 1990, so it was about $17,000 or something like that, compared to the $10,000 they were making
That
at
they
the
were
time.
okay.
Um, so yeah, they are. So yeah, these students were able to force the Taco Bell off campuses. They were shut down their restaurants on 18 university campuses, and they forced Taco Bell to sign an agreement with the CIW. And then after
Okay.
Taco Bell, they went for McDonald's. After McDonald's, they went for Whole Foods, and after Whole Foods, um, they went for Walmart, and this
Okay.
now results in about 14 major buyers have agreements with the CIW in something called the Fair Food Program, where they pay extra to fund wage increases, and it's resulted in a 25 to 50% pay increase for the workers, and also as well, they sign up to a code of conduct which is enforced by the workers. So the workers, if they see something is wrong, they report it to
They
the
would.
CIW, and the CIW has then said, like, look, as per our agreement, the workers
This is
aren't
being
getting
it.
break times, they aren't getting, they're being subjected to forced labor. You can't source from this farm until this is resolved.
Okay.
And this is,
Okay.
again, it turns that competition that I was talking about earlier
Into
from where, like,
collaboration.
into collaboration, well, into like, now farms have to meet, if they want to access these buyers, they have to meet these decent standards. And it's been for a place that was known as ground zero of modern day slavery in the US. It has been transformatory, this program. So I
Okay.
really do
Wow.
think, in terms of like, so again, it's like, as individual consumers, again, like, keep following the news of this. Because often you will see in the particularly in the Guardian and the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, especially Emiliano Malena at the Bureau has been fantastic in reporting this.
Okay.
Um, Look out for the named farms in these reports, and you will often be able to see, that this farm has come up in my supermarket. It's like, oh, this is
I can
named as
boycott
as a,
it. Mhm.
as a supplier. So keep an eye on that, and then also be able to sort of like, I always like reading the labels and then seeing if I can like notice any kind of trends, any kind of like employers that I know. And so yeah, so that's something that you can do as an individual to keep aware of this, but also more importantly, I think it's keeping this knowledge and thinking, okay, how do we organize this into a movement?
Just as the
So
power of organized citizenship together clearly
exactly.
worked in Florida.
And just because I realized I haven't mentioned this, like we staged. Is it 5 o'clock we finish?
No worries, it's fine.
Okay, okay, great. Okay, I won't take much longer than this, but I noticed one of the things that we did with these Latin American farm workers, like Julio's group that I mentioned before, we staged a demonstration outside the Home Office protesting the conditions on these farms, the farms that these workers worked at, and also the long waits they've had for justice and redress in this
Mhm.
situation, and the toll that this has had on them. And what was really significant about that is this gave an opportunity for lots of people who have been following this issue, for organizations who have wanted to do something about this, to take part and directly meet these workers. So again, I think it's kind of like, I think if, especially if you're in the UK, um, keep an eye out for the work that the Land Workers Alliance does on this issue, because this is something that we're trying to think about, how we can turn the kind of like the public consciousness of this issue, the public awareness and the desire to do something into a movement that is kind of like both in connection with workers, but also has the ability to actually start placing direct pressure on this. Because again, this is something I have realized in, it's like the and again, when it could talk about the sort of privileges that, like, native citizens have versus migrants, is
Mhm.
that if consumers write to these organizations saying, I am concerned about this case, I think action needs to be taken,
Mhm.
they will pay attention to these things.
Okay.
If UK institutions write to organizations in the in the global south saying we are concerned about what's going on here, they will act and all
Okay.
that kind
So
of stuff. So
consumer law can be a tool.
consumer action can definitely be a tool, and this is something that we are trying to find ways of turning into something that's very targeted and very effective and can actually result in genuine changes for workers. Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, thank you, Catherine, for this very, very enlightening and very eye-opening talk. I think it's very important for us to know that all of the products that are in the supermarket have a story behind them, and it's important to
Hmm.
know who is behind that story. So, thank you very much for being with us today, and yeah, have a good night.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been wonderful. Catch you
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye bye.
Okay, bye.